Flight 247. Departed from London Heathrow at 11:45 p.m. Destination, New York JFK. A red-eye flight carrying 218 passengers across the Atlantic Ocean. Most of them were already asleep. The cabin lights had been dimmed to a soft blue glow. Somewhere over the Irish Sea, the plane found its cruising altitude. 30,000 feet above the earth. Above the clouds. Above the noise of the world below. In seat 14B, a woman sat quietly. Her name was Fatima. She was 43 years old, traveling alone. A dark navy hijab framed her face. Her black abaya was neatly arranged around her. On her lap sat a small worn leather Quran, its edges softened by years of use. Her carry-on bag was stowed perfectly above her. Her seat tray was up. Her window shade was half open. Through that small oval window, the sky outside was a deep, endless black, broken only by the faint silver light of a crescent moon. Fatima had been on many flights before. But this one felt different. She had received difficult news before boarding. Her mother, back in Cairo, had fallen ill. Seriously ill. The doctors had used words that frightened her. Words like, critical, and we don't know yet. She had booked the earliest return flight she could find. And now she sat here, suspended between two worlds, unable to do anything except the one thing she had always done in moments of helplessness. She turned to Allah. She closed her eyes. She raised her hands slightly, resting them open on her lap. Her lips began to move. Silently. Slowly. In dua. O Allah, you are the healer. You are Al-Shafi. My mother is in your hands. You alone can restore her. I place my trust in you completely. The passenger in 14A was asleep. The passenger in 14C had headphones on. Nobody noticed Fatima. Nobody, that is, except one person. Claire had been a flight attendant for 11 years. She was good at her job, efficient, professional, quick on her feet. But tonight she was tired. Her feet ached. She had worked a morning flight to Dublin and was now on her third rotation of the week. She moved through the cabin with her service cart, collecting cups, offering water, checking that seat belts were fastened among those still awake. When she reached row 14, she slowed down. She noticed the woman in 14B. The closed eyes. The open hands. The moving lips. Claire watched for a moment. Something shifted in her expression. It started as confusion. Then something less charitable than confusion. She leaned slightly over the cart. Her colleague Marcus was 2 rows behind her. She didn't call him over. She handled this herself. She leaned down toward Fatima. Close enough that she could be heard over the ambient hum of the engines without raising her voice too much. But she did raise her voice. Enough. Ma'am. Fatima did not respond. She was deep in dua. Ma'am. Louder this time. The passenger in 14A stirred. The one in 14C pulled off one headphone. Claire straightened up slightly and said it. Clearly. Loud enough for the entire row, and the rows immediately in front and behind, to hear every word. Ma'am, this is not a mosque. A beat of silence. Then Fatima slowly, without any hurry, opened her eyes. She looked up at Claire. She took in the expression on the flight attendant's face, the impatience, the smirk that wasn't quite a smile. And then Fatima did something nobody expected. She didn't frown. She didn't argue. She didn't reach for words. She simply smiled. A quiet, unshakable smile. The kind of smile that comes not from amusement, but from a place so deep inside a person that nothing on the outside can reach it. You're right, Fatima said softly. It isn't. But he is still listening. Claire blinked. She opened her mouth. Closed it again. Then she pushed her cart forward and moved on. The passenger in 14C slowly put his headphone back on. But he did not press play. The man in 14C was named David. He was a 58-year-old accountant from Manchester, traveling to New York for a conference. He had not practiced any religion in 30 years. He considered himself a practical man. A man of spreadsheets and logic and things that could be measured and proven. But he had heard every word of that exchange. And something about it sat uncomfortably in his chest as he stared at his screen without seeing it. The flight attendant had said something cutting, something designed to diminish. And the woman in the hijab had responded with something that didn't fit into any category he had for these kinds of interactions. She hadn't escalated. She hadn't shrunk. She had simply redirected towards something he couldn't see. And she had done it with a smile that he could only describe, privately, as the most self-possessed expression he had seen on another human being in a very long time. 3 rows back, a young mother traveling with her 7-year-old daughter had also heard. The daughter tugged at her sleeve. "Mama, why did that lady say that?" The mother didn't answer immediately. She looked toward row 14, where the woman in the navy hijab had returned to her quiet prayer, undisturbed. "I don't know, baby," the mother finally said. "But did you see how she answered?" The daughter nodded slowly. She wasn't scared. The mother pulled her daughter a little closer. "No," she said quietly. She wasn't. Meanwhile, at the back of the plane, Marcus had overheard more than Claire realized. He said nothing to her when she returned to the galley. But he watched her face. And he noticed something. The smirk was gone. In its place was something that looked, if he wasn't imagining it, like the very earliest edge of unease. 10 minutes passed. The cabin had settled back into its nighttime quiet. The service cart was parked at the rear galley. The engines maintained their steady, deep roar. Fatima had finished her dua and sat with her Quran open on her lap, reading quietly in the half-light from the overhead beam above her seat. Then it happened. It began with a sound. A sound that every experienced flyer knows and feels in their stomach before they fully understand it with their mind. It was a sound not of the engines failing but of the air itself changing around the aircraft. A low, structural shudder. Then a drop. Not a dramatic drop. Not a fall. But a sudden downward lurch, the kind where your stomach rises before your body does, and then a second one, sharper than the first. The aircraft had entered a pocket of severe clear air turbulence. Invisible. Undetectable by radar. The kind that appears without warning at altitude. Immediately the overhead seatbelt signs illuminated with a sharp ding. Multiple passengers gasped. A cup of water on someone's tray table went sideways. A child cried out near the back. The aircraft shuddered again, this time for longer, a sustained vibration that moved through the floor, through the seats, through the bones of every person on board. And then the intercom clicked on. The voice of Captain Edwards came through. He was a 53-year-old pilot with 24 years of experience. He had spoken to passengers through turbulence hundreds of times. His voice was always measured. Controlled. Professional. But tonight, there was something in it. Something thin. Something underneath the professionalism that the ear catches even when the words are correct. He said all the right things. "Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. We are experiencing some turbulence. Please remain calm." But his voice was shaking. The turbulence did not stop after the announcement. It intensified. The aircraft bucked and rolled in a way that had nothing to do with normal flight. Overhead bins rattled. A flight attendant in the rear galley stumbled against the wall and grabbed the handle above the compartment door. Passengers who had been asleep were now awake, white-knuckled, staring at the ceiling as though they could see through it to whatever was happening outside. Claire was in the middle of the cabin when the second major jolt hit. She grabbed the headrest of seat 12A. Her service cart rolled 2 feet before hitting the seat leg anchor. For the first time in 11 years of flying, she felt something she had professionally trained herself never to feel in front of passengers. Fear. Real, physical, gripping fear. Not of the turbulence itself, she knew statistically that planes survived turbulence, but of the particular sound the aircraft was making. A sound she had never heard before. Deep. Resonant. As though the fuselage itself was under a pressure it was working very hard to resist. She looked toward the front of the cabin. Seat 14B. Fatima had not reached for the armrests. She had not closed her Quran and braced. She had not looked up at the ceiling in fear or reached across to touch a stranger's arm in panic. She sat exactly as she had been sitting. Completely still. Her Quran was now closed, held gently in both hands against her chest. Her eyes were closed again. Her lips were moving again. Not in panic. In prayer. The contrast was so stark, so absolute, that Claire stood in the aisle gripping that headrest and stared. Around her, passengers moaned, prayed in their own fragmented ways, clutched armrests and each other. And in seat 14B, one woman sat in the eye of it all like something unmovable. Like something that had already made peace with every possible outcome and therefore feared none of them. Claire's smirk was gone. It had been gone since the exchange 2 rows back. But now, watching this woman, something else left Claire's face as well. Her certainty. Her confidence in the smallness of what she had mocked. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. Not gradually. Not tapering off into smaller and smaller bumps. It simply stopped. The aircraft leveled. The shuddering ceased. The rattling went quiet. The roar of the engines, which had somehow seemed louder during the turbulence, settled back to its normal, rhythmic hum. For approximately 4 seconds, nobody on Flight 247 made a sound. Then a man near the back exhaled loudly. A woman pressed her hand to her chest. Someone said, "Oh my God," in a whisper. The child who had cried out earlier began to laugh, the strange relieved laughter of a small person who doesn't fully understand what just happened but feels that the danger has passed. The seatbelt light remained on, but its urgency felt different now. Precautionary rather than desperate. The intercom clicked again. Captain Edwards. His voice this time was different in the other direction. It was steadier. But there was something in it that hadn't been there before the turbulence. Something quieter. Ladies and gentlemen, we appear to have passed through that rough patch. All systems are normal. We expect smooth air for the remainder of our flight. I want to personally thank you for your composure. He paused for a half-second longer than pilots usually pause. Please rest well. In seat 14B, Fatima opened her eyes. She looked out the half-open oval window beside her. The moon was still there. The crescent. Small and silver and utterly indifferent to the drama that had just passed. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked down at the Quran in her hands. She ran her thumb across the cover. And she whispered something. Not to anyone around her. Just upward. Alhamdulillah. David in 14C heard it. He didn't know Arabic. But he understood the tone completely. 15 minutes after the turbulence ended, Claire walked slowly up the aisle. Not with her cart this time. Without it. She stopped at row 14. Fatima looked up. For a moment Claire said nothing. She had rehearsed something in the galley. She had assembled words in a professional order. She had intended to say something brief, appropriate, airline approved. Something that acknowledged without admitting. Something that moved the moment forward without sitting in it. But standing here, looking at this woman, who had sat through that turbulence like a lighthouse sits through a storm, the assembled words didn't come. Instead, what came was something unrehearsed. Something that surprised Claire herself as she heard herself say it. I want to apologize. For what I said earlier. It was wrong of me. Fatima looked at her for a moment. Not with triumph. Not with the satisfaction of someone who had been proven right and was now receiving acknowledgement of that fact. She looked at her with something that was, somehow, even harder to receive than judgment. Warmth. Simple, uncomplicated warmth. Please, Fatima said. Sit with me for a moment. Claire blinked. She looked back toward the galley. Then back at Fatima. And she sat. In the empty aisle seat, 14D had been unoccupied the whole flight. She perched on the edge of it. Were you frightened? Fatima asked. During the turbulence? Yes, Claire said. Honestly. Without the professional filter. So was I, Fatima said. Every time. I am always frightened. Claire frowned. But you didn't look. Frightened and trusting, Fatima said quietly, are not opposites. I was afraid. And I gave that fear to the one who holds the sky itself in place. That is all dua is. Giving your fear to Allah. Telling him, I cannot carry this alone. Claire sat in that aisle seat for 12 minutes. She knew because she glanced at the cabin clock on the way back to the galley. 12 minutes. In 11 years, she had never sat with a passenger for 12 minutes for any reason other than a medical situation. Fatima told her about her mother. She didn't dramatize it. She didn't perform grief. She simply told it plainly, the way people tell things when they are so tired of carrying them alone that the telling itself becomes a form of relief. Her mother's name was Nadia. She was 71. She had raised 5 children in Cairo, mostly alone after their father passed. She had made Fatima memorize 3 chapters of the Quran before the age of 10. She had pressed her thumb to Fatima's forehead every morning for the first 18 years of her life and said the same words, "You are protected. You are loved. Allah sees you." And now Nadia was in a hospital bed and Fatima was 30,000 feet in the air, unable to do anything except talk to the one who could. Claire listened. She did not check her watch. She did not glance toward the galley. She listened the way people rarely listen, with her full attention, without preparing her response while the other person was still speaking. When Fatima finished, there was a silence. Not uncomfortable. Full. "I'll pray for her," Claire said. And then she seemed to catch herself, as though she wasn't sure she still had the right to use that word. "I mean, I don't really, I used to, when I was young. But I'll think of her. Really think of her." Fatima reached over and placed her hand briefly over Claire's. "That is enough. That is more than enough." At 5:47 a.m. Eastern Time, Flight 247 began its descent into JFK. The cabin lights brightened slowly from night mode blue to the warmer tones of a simulated morning. Passengers stirred. Seats were repositioned. Tray tables were stowed. The organized choreography of arrival began. David in 14C had not slept. He had spent the remainder of the flight doing something he hadn't done since university. Thinking. Not about the conference. Not about the quarterly reports he needed to review on the taxi ride into Manhattan. He had been thinking about the woman in 14B. About what he had witnessed. About what the turbulence had revealed, not about the plane, but about the people inside it. About the extraordinary contrast between the way fear had moved through that cabin and the way it had failed, entirely, to move through one particular seat. He was not a religious man. He told himself that again, firmly. He was a practical man. A logical man. And yet, when Fatima stood to retrieve her bag from the overhead compartment, he stood too. "Excuse me," he said. She turned. He was a tall man. He looked slightly awkward, the way people look when they are saying something they haven't said in a very long time. "I heard what that attendant said to you earlier. And I heard how you answered. And I watched you during." He gestured vaguely upward, meaning the turbulence. "I just wanted to say. Whatever you have, whatever you were doing in that seat, I've never seen anything like it. In 58 years. Fatima smiled at him. The same smile. The same deep, unshakable one. "It isn't mine," she said simply. "I borrowed it. From him." David nodded slowly. He sat back down. He stared at the seat in front of him. Then, very quietly, for the first time in 30 years, he closed his eyes. He didn't know the words. He didn't know the form. He simply sent something upward. Something wordless. Something in the direction of whatever had held that plane steady and kept that woman unafraid. Flight 247 touched down at JFK at 6:12 a.m. The wheels met the runway with the standard jolt. The engines reversed. The aircraft slowed. Passengers applauded, as they sometimes do after turbulent flights, that instinctive communal expression of relief and gratitude for the ordinary miracle of arrival. Fatima did not applaud. She pressed her forehead briefly to the worn cover of her Quran. Just for a moment. Just long enough to say what needed to be said privately. Alhamdulillah. 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 At the gate, While passengers gathered bags and shuffled into the aisle, Claire appeared beside her one last time. She was holding a small folded piece of paper. She held it out. "My name is Claire. And my number. I know that's unusual." She paused. "I hope your mother recovers. I really do. And I'd like to know. If you're willing to tell me." Fatima took the paper. She folded it carefully and placed it inside the cover of her Quran. "She will recover," she said. Not with the forced brightness of someone trying to believe something. With the quiet certainty of someone who has placed a matter entirely in hands larger than her own and made peace with whatever those hands decide. And either way, she is held. Claire watched her go. Down the jetway. Into the terminal. Into the crowd. Until the dark navy hijab disappeared into the river of travelers. She stood at the aircraft door for a moment longer than she needed to. Marcus appeared beside her. "You all right?" She nodded. Then she said something that surprised them both. "I think I need to find a church." As for Fatima, she called Cairo from the terminal. Her sister answered on the second ring. There was a pause. And then her sister said, "She's better. The doctors say she turned a corner around 4 a.m. We don't understand it." They don't understand it. Fatima stood in the middle of JFK Airport, thousands of people flowing around her, and she was completely still. And she smiled. That smile. And she looked upward. And she said one word. Alhamdulillah. Because he had been listening. At 30,000 feet. Over the Irish Sea. In seat 14B. He had always been listening. And for those who place their trust in Allah, He is sufficient.